With the fall of the Ghiscari Empire, Valyria experienced a time of great expansion. The 5 wars they waged on geese had awakened the freehold's insatiable appetite for conquest, colonization, and more importantly, slaves. Within the burning mountains of the 14 Flames lied rich ores and precious minerals for which the freeholders craved endlessly. While most claim that the Valyrian need for slaves derived from their need for copper, tin, gold, and silver that resided within these volcanic mountains, others say that the blood mages needed fresh sacrifices to temper the restless fires of the 14 Flames. Whatever their reasons might have been, it was beyond dispute that the freehold expanded in all directions, to places where the ghiscari had not. Along the shores of Essos, Valyria would establish cities which in the fullness of time would be known as the Free Cities. All of these cities had their own differing origins, beliefs, gods, and their own type of rulers, whether they be triarchs, archons, princes, or magistrates. Cities that were erected and ruled by the freehold alone were represented by archons sent by Valyria, most often though on dragonback. However, the free cities were a notable exception, for they were independent from their mother. However, 8 of the 9 free cities were dutiful daughters to Valyria, and would often answer the Dragon Lord's call, or turn to the freehold in times of crisis. The first of these was Valantis. It was originally established as a military outpost along the mighty Rhoynar River as it meets the summer sea. But as time passed, the wealthiest men of the freehold had raised it up into a sprawling city. A city that quickly absorbed much of the wealth that flowed along the Rhoynar. Like its distant mother, Old Valantis is a freehold, where 3 triarchs are chosen by landowners to lead for only a year. The city of Tyrosh was likewise established as a military outpost, originally raised to control shipping in between the Stepstones, a collection of rocky islands in between Dorne and Essos. However, when they discovered a snail that produced a unique dye, it quickly became popular among Valyrian nobility, and in so doing, thousands of merchants transformed this outpost into a city. Lys and Myr became trading outposts, with the former's climate becoming a retreat for dragon lords. Qohor and Norvos were founded by religious dissidents fleeing Valyria, for the freehold had a special tolerance for religious beliefs. Some say this was done to prevent slave rebellions uniting under a singular faith, while others claim that the Valyrians had styled themselves as more powerful than any gods. Pentos and Lorath both claim to have been cities erected prior to the coming of the Dragon Lords, and thus paid homage to Valyria as client states. But Braavos, the youngest of the free cities, wasn't founded by Valyria or its peoples, but by its slaves. Legend tells that a massive slaver fleet, carrying hundreds of peoples that Valyria had subdued, rose up against their masters and seized control of the fleet. With the guidance of the Moonsingers, these slaves had retreated far north, to a smoky lagoon, a place where no dragons could find. For centuries, these Braavosi hid from the freehold, hiding their maps, coloring their sails, and lying to merchants about where they had came from. All that had ended with the unmasking, where a Braavosi sea lord had employed the Iron Bank of Braavos to enter into secret negotiations with Valyria. And in this, the key holders of the Iron Bank were successful, paying the descendants of the slave owners while refusing to pay for the slaves themselves. With peace assured, Braavos unveiled itself to the world. Due to its origins, Braavos has been known as the Bastard Daughter. As the freehold sought more and more conquest and slaves, they came into conflict with many peoples, some of which would eventually turn their gaze to the sunset kingdoms of Westeros. The first of these were the children of the Rhoynar. As the mightiest river in the world, the Rhoynar stretches across most of western Essos and would be home to the mighty Rhoynar, a civilization near as powerful and ancient as Old Geese. Fishers, traders, scholars, blacksmiths, and water wizards flourished along the banks of the river, whom they worshipped as Mother Rhoynar. Though they were united by faith and culture, the Rhoynish cities were fiercely independent, each of them ruled by their own prince or princess, for the river folk held men and women equal to one another. At first, the Rhoynar princes greeted Valyrian colonists warmly, for all men were welcome to share in the bounty of Mother Rhoynar. It is said that the Rhoynar were the first to work in iron, and they taught many peoples how to use this craft, including Valyria. But in time, the freeholders surpassed their tutors, creating a unique type of steel that was light but unnaturally sharp, with ripples along the blades. These weapons would become known as Valyrian steel, steel that would be treasured across the world. But as the centuries passed, the fellowship between the Valyrians and the Rhoynar would sour and grow to rivalry, as each new Valyrian city was raised along the river, usurping much of the wealth that flowed, particularly Volantis, where it absorbed all the wealth that came from the Summer Sea, whereas the Rhoynish city of Sarhoy saw its wealth dwindle. But despite the growing hostilities, peace prevailed, for a time. The second people that Valyria had contended with were the Andals. Originating from the axe, the Andals were originally a nomadic people, until they carved out a kingdom in the Velvet Hills of Andalos, a region where Pentos would eventually hold sway. The Andals were a quarrelsome, warlike people, but also pious, worshipping a god that possessed 7 faces: the father, the mother, the warrior, the smith, the maiden, the crone, and the stranger, who was both man and woman. Their holy teachings say that these 7 who were one once roamed Andalos in human form, and it was they who crowned Hugor of the Hills with a glowing crown, and foretold that he and his descendants would carve out kingdoms from lands across the Western Sea. But it wasn't gods that made the Andals flee Essos, but dragons. When the Valyrian freehold encroached closer and closer towards Andal territory, they came into conflict with these zealous warriors. The most notable of these was Qarlon the Great, an Andal warlord who sought to unite all Andals under his rule. For a time he was successful, until he moved against the free city of Norvos, where he awakened the dragon's wrath. The Dragon Lords not only eviscerated Qarlon and his host, but they also scoured the entire Lorathi Isles with dragon flame. This atrocity has thus been known as the Scouring of Lorath. When they saw that resisting the freehold was a futile endeavor, the Andals fled farther and farther west, reaching the very shores of Essos, where they at last mounted their ships and fled across the seas to the lands of the First Men. There they began their conquest of Westeros, subduing each kingdom one after the other, all save the north, the frigid, icy realm of the Kings of Winter, the Starks of Winterfell. Gazing back to Essos, the relationship between the Valyrians and the Rhoynar continued to sour, as tensions between the rival cities continued to become ever more rancorous. These series of rivalries finally came to a boil when the Valyrians netted and butchered a gigantic turtle that the Rhoynar had held sacred. They viewed these creatures as the old men of the river, the holy consorts of Mother Rhoyne herself. Thus began the Rhoynish Wars, a series of conflicts that spanned across centuries. Cities and towns were burnt, drowned, rebuilt, and their peoples captured and enslaved. Oftentimes, the Rhoynar would win one war or another, but in the end, Mother Valyria proved stronger than Mother Rhoyne, for the Rhoynar princes were fiercely independent and thus fought alone, while the freehold had the might of her dutiful daughter cities at its back. This series of conflicts finally came to a bloody climax during the Second Spice War, where the Valyrians and their Volantene cousins burnt down the port city of Sarhoy that lied across the summer sea. Its pink towers were torn down, its peoples enslaved, and the ground sown with salt and lime, so nothing would ever grow. This atrocity finally brought the Rhoynar together under the leadership of Prince Garin of Croyane. This warrior prince assembled an army of over 2,500,000 and marched against every Valyrian city on the river. First of these was Selhoris, where he defeated a Valyrian host of over 30,000 warriors. Then he moved against Velisar. At Valantheris, Garin encountered an army of over 100,000, 100 war elephants, and 3 dragon lords. But again, the prince emerged triumphant, but at grave cost. Thousands burned in dragon flame, though thousands more took shelter along the river, while their water wizards conjured waterspouts against the enemy dragons. 2 dragons were brought down by Rhoynish archers, while the last fled, wounded. Then, Mother Rhoyne rose enraged and destroyed half of Valantheris. In the wake of their victory, the Rhoynar proclaimed their ruler as Garin the Great as they marched towards Volantis. The Volantenes hid behind their black walls and sent a call to aid from Valyria. And this call, the Dragon Lords heeded. At Valantheris, Garin encountered 3 Dragon Lords. At Volantis, he contended with 300. The dragons descended upon Garin's host and burned it to ash. Some tried to flee to the river to fight the fires of Valyria, only to be drowned in the embrace of Mother Rhoyne. Prince Garin was captured and imprisoned in a golden cage at the command of the Dragon Lords, whilst he watched as his fellow countrymen burned or put to the sword. He would witness many more as the Valyrians marched north, scouring the river clean of all remaining Rhoynar cities. The last city to meet the dragon's wrath was Croyane, Garin's own city. The greatest city of the Rhoyne was sacked, scourged, and her people enslaved. In a final act of defiance, the prince cursed the conquerors, pleading for Mother Rhoyne to avenge her children. And so she did. The water flooded, and a fog of evil humors befell the Valyrians, and they soon began to die of grayscale, a disease in which hardens men's skin to stone and driving them into madness. The last of the princesses of the Rhoyne, Nymeria of Nysaur, gathered a fleet of over 10,000 ships and filled them full of women and children, and began an exodus that took them far from Mother Rhoyne. An exodus that would eventually take her and her people to the shores of Dorne, where she would eventually establish the Dornish Principality. The once proud Rhoynar, a civilization that had once rivaled Old Geese, had been humbled, butchered, and brought low by the might of Valyria. Those who clung to the remains of the once proud Rhoynish cities were a sad, timid people, while river pirates prowled the shores, seeking prey, and plunder. With the flight of the Andals and the Rhoynar, Valyria became the undisputed power in western Essos. What began as a city of dragons and sorcerers had grown into a gleaming city, and by war and conquest, that city became the capital of a great empire that would control the known world. Valyria was the mightiest civilization known to mankind, either before or since. Over 1,000 dragons and a navy that could engulf the seas of the world, it was made to endure to the end of time. It didn't, for their time of doom was at hand.